Welcome to Coffee Break Philosophy. I'm Christian, and today we're talking about materialism, skepticism, and morality. We're going to get a little help from G.K. Chesterton through his work Orthodoxy again. We first introduced Chesterton in the last video of this series, so be sure to check it out as well. So grab some brew and let's talk about materialism, skepticism, and morality. So Chesterton famously wrote that there is a thought which stops all thoughts. And I like to pull from another part of Chesterton saying that there is also an act which stops all acts, and that act is suicide. So in a suicide, in the mind of the suicidal man, it isn't that he's not worthy of living, it's that there's nothing worth living for. This is the ultimate insult to the entirety of the world. Likewise, Chesterton's quote might imply that there's a thought which claims that there's nothing worth thinking about. Again, an insult to all thought. Our intellect is capable, according to Chesterton, of destroying itself. And here he's speaking in relation to skepticism particularly, but also partially to materialism, which we'll get into in just one moment. Now, skepticism and materialism are two essentially opposing philosophical camps. They're not directly opposing each other, but in a sense, you'll see what I mean. There tend to be opposites. Now, the materialists, which is one philosophical camp, these materialists formulate the world as purely guided by the clockwork of the natural law, as I like to think of it. So what we understand of physics and mathematics makes up the totality of the world, and there's nothing more. No spirituality, no God, nothing supernatural. What you see is what you get with the materialists. Now, I thought this implies two interesting things for morality. And materialists can be moral people. Atheists can be moral people. Materialists, essentially by definition, have to be atheists. Now, they must assume that morality is either, one, an objective reality that is built into the natural world. Now, this would suggest that we must use scientific tools, or whatever tools we have to observe the nature around us to gather that morality and find out what the objective morality is. So it's either objective, or the second option, number two, for the materialist with regard to morality, is that there is no objective morality. And of course, this would devolve into morality as a mere human construction and leads to moral relativism. So skepticism is the other philosophical camp that Chesterton spoke about, and in my opinion, it is the more dangerous of the two. Skepticists doubt that reality is true or even real, or that we can't accurately know reality or experience it because of our own subjectivity. So skepticists doubt anything objective. Therefore, they automatically default to moral relativism. Even if they admit there could be an objective or absolute morality, we cannot know it because of our own subjective experience, and thus we'd have to default to moral relativism, the ultimate in societal decline. Furthermore, besides morality, there's also no point of reason because there are no objective facts which we can base our worldview off of. So reason itself is dead in the world of the skeptic. And Chesterton spoke very harshly of the skeptics in his book Orthodoxy for good reason. For these very reasons, his contemporaries generally fell into one of these two camps, materialists or skeptics. And he tore, in my opinion, more into the skeptic than the materialist. Skepticism applied to morality is just moral relativism run rampant. We can see this in, for example, promiscuous behavior, which has ruined families and marriages for a long time, but especially in such high numbers in the past 50 or so years. And it's no small matter that we're playing with here. The family is not something you want to mess with, because the family is essentially the building block of a society. It's not the individual. By law, yes, it should be the individual, but in actuality, In the grander scheme, it's the family that determines the future of society. The parents are essentially the present of the society, and the children are the future. Skepticism is a destroyer of reason itself. Now, the church was mobilized to defend reason even by terrible means. Even when the means were incorrect, the motivation was certainly called for. And this is why Chesterton pictured the church as a heroic defender of reason and truth. And for 2,000 years, that's what the church has been doing. We've fought against dangerous ideas that have wrecked the modern world, especially in recent times. Like I said, the degradation of the family. Now, morality doesn't change. In fact, the more unchanging a religion's morality, the more I find it convincing. Technology doesn't change morality. There were calls for a new application of morality in particular instances. That's what science and progress in the sciences calls for. It opens up new places to apply morality, and morality should be applied in every place possible for a good and decent society. But the underlying rules now don't change. Some examples of what the church has defended against are terrible things that have destroyed society, like the tides of communism that wrecked individual freedom and the innate value of each human person. There was a sexual revolution of the 1960s that destroyed marriages and families. Then there were heresies like determinism that essentially took away our ability to choose, at least in a philosophical or religious sense. And then lastly, there's abortion, euthanasia, and the evils of suicide, even state-approved suicide that is increasingly growing today, that have all resulted in the current culture of death, and which the church has stood firmly against for all of time. And many might suppose that the church and all religion, especially highly organized religions, have historically resisted the products of science and reason, the claimed tools of the materialists. But taking Darwin's evolution as an example, even Chesterton recognized in his day that the physical mundane idea of evolution does not imperil religion nor reason, and in fact that Christianity has all the science and reason of materialism and more. It has a defined morality. Evolution, if taken in a purely philosophical sense, so remove it from its scientific context and interpret it only philosophically. This is a dangerous way to treat evolution because it results, as Chesterton wrote, in all things simply flowing from one thing to the next. And this is essentially an attack on the individuality or the uniqueness of each human person. So no person is unique if we're all flowing from one to the next in an evolutionary sense. And what I found interesting is that even in Chesterton's day, he understood that God was outside time and that Darwin's theories weren't really a danger to Christianity at all, as I had always suspected and guessed myself. But I thought it was a more modern idea that God was outside time that came along with the physicists like Einstein and general relativity. But that wasn't so, and that even in Chesterton's day, before Einstein, he understood this to be true. And I think that everyone, even atheists, can agree that religion, at the least, provides an obvious morality. What I mean by an obvious morality is one that is blatantly clear to everyone. It's written down, it's set in stone, it doesn't change, and that everyone within the same religion generally holds those values. And atheism doesn't enjoy the same benefit. Even if there is an objective morality that you can derive from science, as we spoke of, each atheist may come to different conclusions about what those are, or the interpretation of those moralities. So religion provides one fundamental set of morality, a map for every person, no matter their level of education, to follow. That's it for us today on materialism, skepticism, and morality, with some help from Chesterton through his book Orthodoxy, which you can check out using the link in the description below. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check out our previous episodes on Chesterton in this series. Particularly the last episode was How to Understand Through the Unknown. There's plenty of genius from Chesterton to cover in the future episodes, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment below with your thoughts, opinions, what you like, what you don't like. Thanks.